We were developing a production pipeline that says, I want to attack 2 or 3 different platforms, but I only want the one workflow. I want to create the assets once, and I want to use them multiple times in these formats. Angel Eyes is the world's first cinematic VR graphic novel experience. So where we're starting to use the sound and the ambisonic mix that comes in through your left and through your right, and where we're breaking the panels and moving the elements about, you have to think about that theatrical presentation as well as that cinematic presentation. Right. From the writing perspective, you start to introduce maybe a little bit more direction into the scripted element than you would typically, because you're trying to help the artist say, well, actually, we're going to need this arm on a different thing, or we're going to need an individual cut of this hand, and so forth. They allow you to present in those ways which I don't think you can do on any other platform. They are very unique in that perspective.
Welcome to Beyond the Frames, the media and entertainment podcast that takes a look at art, production and business of making entertainment. This is a very special breakout episode of the podcast. I'm at Vertex 2024 in London. I've been taking in talks on creativity and art all day, and I'm delighted to be speaking to Matt McCartney, who is a multidisciplinary creator. He's a very talented and prolific writer, and he also has a background in technology at entertainment companies. And all of those skills come together beautifully in his work in VR and comics and media production in general. I'd love to start, Matt, with your recent project, Angel Eyes.
Hey, thank you, Rafi, and it's great to be here at Vertex and taking in the sort of the environment and listening to all the talks that are going on in the creative. It's great, but yes, Angel Eyes. Angel Eyes is, I think, the world's first cinematic VR graphic novel experience, in that it is a form of motion comic, but taken a little bit further than you would get maybe just in a straight 16:9 presentation. It was built with the idea of retaining the panel-based experience that you would get from a traditional graphic novel reading.
So comic book panels.
So the panels and the spacing and that medium. But because we were primarily targeting virtual reality, you can take advantage of the spatial environment that comes within that. So we were really trying to create this immersive, consuming experience where you would sit down, you would still read, but the panels would retain, but then bleed out around you, around the 6DoF environment that you get within the headset. So you're getting ambisonic sound mixes. All the artwork is built on layers, so each artifact was individually drawn, so you get the animation and the motions. And the story of Angel Eyes talks about, it's a story of an assassin who is himself assassinated and then put to work thinking he's working for angels preventing the apocalypse, but actually he's working for 2 angels who are trying to bring about the apocalypse. So it's got that sort of demonic, violent story to it. So there's a lot of action and bullets and guns, and again, when it comes to presenting that in VR, you can break the frame. So we have certain shots and scenes where bullets are fired, for example, and they break through the panels and they move through the environment with you. And at the same time they're moving through the environment, you're then getting the ambisonic sound that goes with it. So you're actually playing with sound and movement and motion playing about you in all places. So bringing that all together and bringing graphic novels to life, I think in a way they've never been done before for those platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a unique experience, and I encourage our viewers to check it out. Let me break down a few things you said there that really interest me. You described it as a cinematic VR comic book, or VR comic, is that right?
I did, patent pending. I don't think anyone else has put those things in a sentence together, but there you go.
Well, that's what I love about it, because it just says right there the kind of disciplines of visual storytelling, sequential art, if you will. You know, comic book panels and comic book storytelling is really the art of sequential imaging, sequential storytelling, you know, from panel to panel. But of course, so is cinema and filmmaking, where it's a series of frames really that are presented over time, and then you edit for narrative purposes and, you know, for visceral feel of the kinetic energy in a cinematic experience. And of course, VR immerses you in either surround sound or surround visuals or a mix of both. So you're bringing all of those things together, which is super exciting and really compelling in VR as an experience. What made you choose VR as the primary sort of format for this? What inspired you to bring these things together?
I think The motivation to create it begins when you look, I think, at the pipelines and certainly the costs involved in pipelines. So you talk about cinema, you talk about film, you talk about, I love animation particularly and that style of communication and that output. But they're very lengthy to create, they're very time consuming, they're very costly, they take a long time. And traditionally when you create something in that format, you create for that format and that format alone. So it becomes kind of locked in terms of the production pipeline. So one of the things that myself and the guys that worked on it are very interested in is like, well, we want to create this thing for one medium, but we actually also don't want to exclude other mediums at the same time. So you get this multi-format output. And we do a lot of work, or I've done a lot of work in the past with game engine technology. And one of the things that it does really, really well is it says, well, you can create a whole uniform set of assets and things that sit within me as an engine, and I can help produce 16:9 animation. I can produce for a bit of AI, I can produce for a bit of VR. And in the case of what we did for Angel Eyes, we can actually go back then to the print media at the same time as well.
Yeah.
So we were developing a production pipeline that says, I want to attack 2 or 3 different platforms, but I only want the one workflow. I want to create the assets once, and I want to use them multiple times in these formats, which was really interesting. And I think really for us then VR became the primary one because it's new, it's a little bit out there. I think we could do things that move the discipline of storytelling within graphic novels further than maybe they've gone before.
Yeah.
And the ability to animate through, we used Unity, through Unity in this example, went beyond that of which the animation that you can do within something like the Adobe suite of tools and so forth. So we felt we could push things an awful lot further, and it allowed us really to think about that cinematic experience which we've gone, and if anyone checks out the experience, you can download it from SideQuest now, plug. It is very IMAX scale, it is very big, and it is very there to consume, but it's also starting to move towards that concept of theatre in the round. So where we're starting to use the sound and the ambisonic mix that comes in through your left and through your right, and where we're breaking the panels and moving the elements about, you have to think about that theatrical presentation as well as that cinematic presentation.
Right.
And the VR, and I guess probably if you looked at platforms now like the AVP that are coming along and so forth, you'd look at those as well. They allow you to present in those ways which I don't think you can do on any other platform. They are very unique in that perspective.
Yeah.
But again, it was very important that we go there, but also, we can produce the 16:9 that goes out on YouTube as well, which we did. And then, as I said, print, hopefully coming soon.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the combination of the theatrical presentation and the cinematic is a really important distinction, because why bring it into VR if you don't make use of space and presence, which of course if you go to the theatre, that's what you have, right? You have the performers right there in front of you, you're in a physical space, and you have a sense of presence of being in the same physical space as the story unfolding. So you're bringing some of those touch points into this VR experience, which is great, but as on the graphic side of things, as a graphic novel, I loved how the panels, you would break through the panels, as you say, with the bullets, but the panels themselves had depth as well, sort of like windows into these little scenes. So it's a lovely visual sort of treatment, a visual motif of how you can look into a panel as much as coming out. And the way you play with that as the writer is a really, is a very unique way of telling stories and immersing people in the story. So what was your writing process like? Because you're the writer on this program.
So the writing process was fairly similar, I think, to that which you would undertake for a normal graphic novel. You start with sort of the characters, the story, everything. Any creator will tell you starts with the characters and the stories. You've got to get that characterization right. You've got to build that world correctly. So we begin with that. What becomes more apparent, after you've created your first drafts of scripts and so forth, is you then getting into this idea of, right, we animate in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
We're introducing parallax. So for folks that understand how you create a normal graphic novel, you might create a panel as a single piece of art, for example. It's much like a painting. Because we're trying to animate elements of it and give it depth and parallax, you can't do that. So you have to create a background, a foreground, then you create a character, and then you're creating like an arm or a head or an ear or whatever it happens to be that you're trying to get that motion for in there. So from the writing perspective, you start to introduce maybe a little bit more direction into the scripted element than you would typically, because you're trying to help the artist say, well, actually, we're going to need this arm on a different thing, or we're going to need an individual cut of this hand, and so forth. Because so you find then that you're blending much closer together between the writing and the actual art direction, and the two things come together. So you actually found a very collaborative process. Original scripts would go out, and then in this case, Ant Williams, who did the art for us, would be drawing away and coming back, and then you'd be going, well, we find that doesn't work, or this doesn't work, so you're going to have to go back and rewrite panels and rewrite screens and so forth. And something you'd find as well when you write a traditional graphic novel, you've got limited retail, so you work on a principle of maybe 15 to 20 words a bubble, and you've got a set number of panels. When you move to the motion, that goes away, because obviously you're fading bubbles in and out, and you can keep one panel for almost a minute on screen, but actually go through what would be the equivalent of 4 or 5 panels in a printed volume.
Right.
So
and
again,
the user has agency on that, where they're looking on how they go through the experience.
What we did, not so much. We kept it more passive for a first pass, but you could absolutely go there. And again, we began to develop, as we were going through the process, and again, more from the technical perspective, how do I phrase it politely? We were making a lot of stuff up as we went along, because nobody had done this before. We had no frame of reference for how to create panels, how to put that animation, how to break that through Unity. And as we were doing it, we were learning a bit more, and I think by the time we were getting to episode sort of 5 or 6, it was getting quite slick. But actually, we were looking back and going, do you know what? If we went back and started episode 1 today, we might do things slightly differently. And some of that came out in terms of the agency that you would give the viewer. We wanted to keep it reading, but actually could you then create a thing where you're having more control over moving the panels along themselves? You're starting to move the story at the pace you want to go at, and elements like that.
So this is area to explore with the further iterations or further episodes of this
Absolutely.
IP. Yeah,
absolutely.
So you mentioned Ant in your team. Who are some of the collaborators that help make this project real?
So I worked with 2 companies. One was Ideas and Inks, which is Ant Williams and Andy Lanning, 2 lovely chaps with at least 1,000 years of experience in comic books and graphic novels behind them. Definitely check their stuff out there.
Iconic
wonderful.
Creators in their own right, for sure.
And they worked, Andy and I worked very much on the scripts, and Andy in the creative direction, and Ant as the art director. And drew the art for the panels for the comics. We were very lucky that we got a bunch of other folks to come in to do the covers as well, which was quite nice through Ideas. And then on the development side, I worked with a company called Surround Vision, Dan and Stephen, who brought in that years of experience in Unity and how to bring that to life, and how to work that. So those 2 things melded together. And again, it was very interesting to watch how folks that are drawing and creating comic books and used to working in a particular way, interacting then with game engine development, and how that came to it, and how the 2 began to bounce off each other as we went through the mix. And then we finished that off with a wonderful chap called Tom Howe gave us a very good original score for the piece, which became quite interesting, because again, when you think about it, the musicality of the score, the element, coming to life a lot more in the motion comics and through how we did it than maybe you'd think possible. It's one of those things that if you watch the piece without the music, it feels one way, and then you put that score back in again, it feels completely different. It makes a huge difference.
It's narrating it along with any visuals that you would have through it. It's just as powerful as a narrator.
And I think for us it stood out a bit more because there's no voice, there's no speech within it, and we were very deliberate in our attempt to say, actually, we want to keep this a reading experience, because it would have been quite easy to put voiceover instead of bubbles, but that didn't feel then like it was a graphic novel anymore.
Now, you wrote it and you effectively exec produced it, being across all of these, and you had some fantastic collaborators, but your technical background is pretty significant here, because you're leveraging technology in ways that hasn't been done before, and a very unique combination. How important is the hardware sort of tech stack in facilitating this kind of vision? On this channel with Scan, the Scan team are really excellent at understanding what creators are looking to achieve and providing a solution, whether it's a cloud-based solution or whether it's a workstation or a laptop. For my productions, they're my tech partners. All I need to do is describe what I'm looking to achieve, what the production is looking to do, and the tools we're looking to use, and then they're really effective at finding the right solution. So what role did hardware play in the development of your project? Because there's one thing is the hardware that it's exhibited on, which is the VR headset. SideQuest is the sort of the distribution network, but you'd have to view it on a Quest headset. But it's not made on that hardware, so what kind of hardware did you need to make this happen?
It isn't made on those hardware. For us, I think, as with most things, it's the rendering is where things get the hardest. So the folks using the hardware to render out the images, to bring that to life and to bring that animation, needed to be pretty powerful. Was very important. We found sort of lower spec units that didn't quite have the guts, didn't have the GPU to do it, wouldn't.
So like a high-end gaming rig or
so it was
recent
gaming
GPU.
Rig, correct. And again, because it was all done inside Unity, so being able to run those pieces of software
in real time,
and that was very important in coming out. We also found in terms of collaboration tools, again, where that begins to fit in how you're sharing the assets and using the assets. We were finding that we were having to update assets regularly, and if one animator was working on an asset that was, several points out of date, it caused problems in the pipeline. So again, finding platforms and tools that allowed for shared repositories and checking in and checking out that control was quite important as well.
Yeah, version control. Well, thank you so much for speaking to us about Angel Eyes. Check it out on SideQuest. It's a way of side-loading VR experiences on your Quest headset, right?
Correct.
And if anyone wants to reach you, Matt, what's the best way to get in touch with you about writing, creativity, exec producing, and all the great stuff that you're doing? Where can they find you?
Fantastic, thank you, Rafi. LinkedIn is the easiest place to grab hold of me. Fairly easy to find on that. Matthew McCartney, and there I am. So that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome, great to have you, Matt. And thank you for checking out this episode of Beyond the Frames. We're here at Vertex 2024. Hope you enjoyed this chat with Matt. And if you're inspired, leave a comment and check out Matt's work. Thanks a lot.